DK has had it rough. Outside of a window that lasted less than a decade, when he was under the care of Rareware, he's been tossed around to the point where many gamers don't know whether to view him as his own hero or just a spin-off character in the Mario franchise. His games have seen the highest of highs as well as the lowest of lows. He's been used as the face of a gimmick, as well as utilized as the primary hero in an example of what a perfect 2D platformer could look like. In the beginning, he was just a Kong, no different than King Kong. Actually, he was almost exactly like King Kong. He grabbed a damsel in distress and climbed to the top of what I could only describe as an arcade version of a skyscraper, holding her prisoner until the hero would come up to save her. Yeah, it's pretty clear why Universal decided to sue Nintendo in 1982 for infringement. Luckily for Nintendo, King Kong was public domain, so that didn't get anywhere. And now there's a Donkey Kong ride in Universal Orlando, as well as a King Kong ride. It's funny how that works. Also, Miyamoto named him Donkey Kong because when he looked up in the dictionary, the word dumb was associated with a donkey, and yeah, that's our favorite ape's legacy. Up until 1994, he was basically just a beast. Not like a cool beast like the big jack guy at the gym, but basically a scary monster. Although in the Donkey Kong Jr. sequel, he was caged up and being saved by his son, and it was meant to make you feel bad for the beast that didn't know any better when he kidnapped Pauline in the previous title. Or, I don't know, maybe it was an animal rights thing. Nintendo wanted to humanize the enemy. Somebody call the video games are too woke people and have them take a look at this. Whatever the case was, up until Rare's, DK was basically just a big dumb oaf. No true sign of intellect, seemingly no morals, just a big bad guy and scary gorilla. Now by 1993, Donkey Kong Country comes out, he becomes a hero, everybody starts to celebrate, holds this gorilla in high esteem, holds Rare as the greatest company of the 90s, and Sonic fans quickly realized that Sega lost to a monkey. It was great, Nintendo's happy, everybody's happy. Diddy Kong Racing comes out, everybody's still happy. Donkey Kong 64 comes out, everybody's still happy, and now they have a green Nintendo 64 and an expansion pack and enough collectibles to keep them from buying a new game for another decade. Public persona is shifting. Who's the true Nintendo hero, Mario or Donkey Kong? Which kart racer is better, Mario Kart or Diddy Kong Racing? What's the best 3D collectathon on the Nintendo 64? Mario 64 or any of the Rare titles, including Donkey Kong 64? Rare helped Nintendo fight back against Sega, but Nintendo was starting to feel threatened by the very own monster that they created. So they pulled the monkey away from Rare, sold Rare to Microsoft, and took him back to his beastie roots. Well, that's not actually how it all played out, but that's how I always imagined it. Especially because a lot of the actual Rare-related stuff would get relegated, or in many instances put away to never be seen again. Moving into the GameCube era, there was a potential of a Diddy Kong Pilot and a Donkey Kong Racing title, but with Rare being sold to Microsoft, instead we got Donkey Konga, developed by Namco. So Nintendo has these peripherals, they're trying to control games in a different way to appeal to the modern gamer, but we were still too far removed from the Wii Remote for that to not be weird. Now, this game is pretty bare bones as far as the actual gameplay is concerned. You're basically just doing a rhythm thing, not too different to stuff like Dance Dance Revolution or maybe even Guitar Hero. Although there is technically an actual plot here, as well as Diddy Kong and Ellie the Elephant. And there's an actual plot point where the better they bang the drums, the more bananas they get. So, okay. That's cute. We finished Donkey Kong, Rare got sold, Donkey and Diddy are popular still, Nintendo wants to try something fun to hold people over. Alright, whatever. And the year after that, we get a sequel, Donkey Konga 2. Same thing, slightly improved graphics, inclusion of some classic Donkey Kong characters, and a variety of new minigames. Also, this game was rated teen. There was also a Donkey Konga 3, but that one only came out in Japan. Now, around the end of 2004 or early 2005, depending on where you live in the world, more than 5 years after Donkey Kong 64 took the Nintendo 64 by storm, Donkey Kong Jungle beat. So in general, this game seems to be liked. The reviews and the user ratings alike both see it as a slightly average to maybe a little bit above average game. It also made its way onto the Wii with motion controls instead of the bongo drums, but basically you had an entire 2.5D platformer made by the same development team that went on to make Super Mario Galaxy in 2007. However, you were controlling it with bongos. So the game looks good. It arguably plays well if that's what you're into, and many people were into it. There have even been some modifications made online to make this just a regular 2D platformer that controls with a controller, and a lot of people enjoy that. But I think with all of the panic people had with Rare selling Donkey Kong, this was very much what cemented people to believe that Nintendo no longer cared about what the Big Ape was doing. Or at the very least, not in the same way they felt Nintendo should care about what the Big Ape was doing under the care of Rare. In 2007, you would get a Donkey Kong racing game in Donkey Kong Barrel Blast, but you had to bang your Wii remotes to get it to move, the same way that you had to bang the bongos because it was initially developed for the GameCube. On the handheld, you'd get games like Donkey Kong King of Swing, which is a fun game in its own right, but it's another gimmicky experiment where the player holds L and R to grab onto different pegs and swing themselves around, in a type of game that feels like it is beneath the Big Ape. Now, in the same way where something as simple as Donkey Konga would evolve and become Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, a more fleshed out platformer, but still relying on the gimmick, on the Nintendo DS we would get Donkey Kong Jungle Climber, which takes the same type of control idea from King of Swing and expands on it into making it more of an adventure with an actual plot. And again, there was a lot of fun to be had, but at this time, it's 2007. Your primary Donkey Kong games that involve Donkey Kong as the main character up to this point have either involved banging on drums, swinging some Wii remotes, or swinging around pressing the L and the R button. Now, from 2004 and onwards, you would get the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series, 4 of which would release prior to 2011. And while that game is fun, it's more like a spiritual successor to the Donkey Kong arcade titles. Actually, it feels like the evolution of the Donkey Kong on Game Boy that came out in 1994, which I forgot to discuss earlier, actually. But either way, these games were their own beast, and it very much contained the view of Donkey Kong as being the evil beast that Mario needs to defeat in a very arcade-like fashion. It's definitely not your Rare Donkey Kong franchise. Now, imagine all of this is going on. Donkey Kong feels like he's either a villain or he's a gimmick. Throughout the better part of a decade, he became the face of a company, even if he wasn't playable in many of the games that starred his name. Country 2 and Country 3 he was famously absent, but it still felt like it was a Donkey Kong game. And likewise with Diddy Kong Racing, because we obviously associated Diddy Kong with Donkey Kong. But whatever the case may be, anything that his name or something associated with his name would touch became very popular. Not only popular, it was rivaling the top of the industry in the various genres that it was a part of. So now, through the entirety of the 2000s, he was a gimmick. He would show up in the Mario spin-offs as a big animal, a goofy, strong monkey with a big smile. Just a giant popular mascot that's big enough to be a heavy character alongside of Bowser. Like, even in the Mario Party franchise, he would no longer be considered a playable character. In the same manner that Bowser became the big evil spot that you'd wanted to avoid on the board, the Donkey Kong spaces became the angelic light, in contrast to Bowser's dark and devilish spaces. Because I think that's what Nintendo viewed Donkey Kong as. He was Mario's nemesis, but you had a soft spot for him because he was just a big gorilla. Until today, many people associate Donkey Kong with this era of video games, in the same way they associate Star Fox and Captain Falcon with Smash Bros. More than their own franchises. Unless you were somebody that grew up in the 90s and associated Donkey Kong with the Rare era, then realistically speaking, you would associate Donkey Kong more as a spin-off character than anything else. Kinda like Wario, for example. Sure, he's got his own games, his own franchise, but for the most part, these are just characters in Mario Party, characters in Smash Bros., in Mario Kart, in sports titles. And in the case of Donkey Kong, the older crowd knew him from the 80s, right? They mostly played with him in the arcade. It was probably more of a funny transition for them to be using him as the hero than anything else. The further we got along into the 2000s, the further disconnected we felt from what Donkey Kong was originally meant to be, or at least in our minds, the Rareware Donkey Kong. He was a gimmick, spin-off quality, and by that point in time, it felt hopeless. There was probably no chance we were going to get our Donkey Kong again, until this beautiful man stepped onto the stage and said this.
Again. If you listen, you can hear it coming.
Oh man, I could not explain the hype levels felt when we saw that there was a Donkey Kong Country Returns game making its way over to the Nintendo Wii, featuring both Donkey and Diddy Kong. Dude, I was so hyped for this game. Like, you gotta understand this from the perspective of somebody that grew up with the platformers of this game and assuming they were the best of the best. If you ask many people what they define as a Nintendo franchise, they'd be like, oh, Mario and Zelda. Yeah, for me, it has been and always will be Mario and Donkey Kong. Whenever I go back to the retros, I go back to Donkey Kong as much as I go back to Mario. Maybe slightly more towards the Mario side of things. So when they announced Returns, I lost my mind. Mind you, I'm almost 20 years old at this time. The Donkey Kong that I knew had been dead for over a decade. I went through middle school, high school, and nothing. It was completely gone. Back then, I didn't really pay too much attention to developers. I didn't really know who Retro Studios was, but I knew that when I looked at Jungle Beat, it did not look like a true continuation of what I saw in the Country series. In this case, it was very in your face. It was called Country Returns, for goodness sake. The game looked like Donkey Kong Country, but it was modern. Even the lack of the Kremlins didn't bother me. And the motion controls, I was okay with them. A lot of people hate the motion controls for the Nintendo Wii. I always felt if they were simple enough and they didn't feel like they got in the way, it was okay. Now, I'd say the one exception was when you had to blow the little plants, but outside of that, it was pretty good. That little extra shake you'd have to do in the air, that's fine. And some of my best memories of this game on the Nintendo Wii was playing Donkey Kong Country Returns, because it was hard as heck. Man, did anyone else really struggle with this game the first time they played it? I haven't played the port on Switch because, well, it's a port on Switch and I've already played the game 100 times. I don't need it on Switch. But back then, holy crap, that game put me through the ringer. I've actually played through it twice, and the first time that I played through it was entirely co-op. One of my closest friends at the time was not a Nintendo guy, but he did have a Super Nintendo when he was a kid, and he had Donkey Kong, so he was hyped. We went through the entirety of the game together. There were smiles, there were laughs, there were tears, there was throwing of controllers, but damn it did we conquer that title. And I swear, when we played the game back then, it felt like Donkey Kong Country. It was like someone took me right out of my 7-year-old shoes and plopped me down a decade later saying, hey, don't worry, they're gonna make this again, and it's gonna be modern and futuristic and very cool. Returns was awesome. Everything about Returns was awesome. Don't get me wrong, it might have its flaws now. Many people might be able to criticize a lot of things about the game now, but back when it came out, it just felt like the perfect way to get back into Donkey Kong after it had been gone for so long. And the best part is, only a few years later, we got to do it all again on the Wii U. Now, I realize the general perception when Tropical Freeze was announced for many people was that they wish Retro Studios was working on a Metroid title. But for me, nah, dude, give me more of that banana slammer. Bigger, better, more bananas, more beautiful. Dixie Kong, frickin' Dixie Kong's back. Donkey Kong Country Returns, 10 out of 10. Donkey Kong Country Returns Tropical Freeze, 300 out of 10. It was great. I was so hyped for this title, even more than I was for Country Returns, because at this time I had the high expectations and they made them go even higher. I don't even need my friend for this one. I played it on my own and I had a blast with it. And then when it came out for the Switch, yeah, I'm one of those guys. I paid $60, bought it again because I wanted it handheld. I wanted to play it wherever I could at any point in time. I regret that purchase now because I used my Wii U more than my Switch, but that is besides the point. Donkey Kong was back, and it wasn't just a one-time thing. They made a sequel, and I could not wait to see what was next for Donkey Kong. Okay, that's kind of cool. Seth Rogen, they made him look a little bit different. Oh, look at that. He's going to be in a theme park. Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's the house. That's the Congo house. That's it. That's the tree house. God damn it, it's another remake. That was it. It was hopeless. They were never going to bring Donkey Kong back. Over a span of 10 years, all we got was just 2 remakes of the same game. The first one, you could understand. It was a Wii U title, and they needed to bring that library over to a console that actually sold well. Returns HD, fine. But it was 2024, and we hadn't gotten a new game since 2014. January 2025, Donkey Kong Country Returns HD comes out. The very same day, we get a reveal trailer for the Nintendo Switch 2, and Donkey Kong looks different. Much more similar to what we saw on the movie, but nothing like even the Donkey Kong that was in the spin-offs or the HD remake that came out that day. I think for a lot of people, when Donkey Kong appeared like that in the movie, they kind of accepted it. It was the cinematic universe, they needed him to be a little bit more expressive, they wanted him to look like Seth Rogen. Even Bowser looked slightly different, Mario too, they're just part of the cinematic universe. But I think when they saw what Donkey Kong looks like in Mario Kart World, at the time untitled, that's when it really might have started to hit home. Donkey Kong had a certain look to him prior to the Rare era. He was a gorilla, a beast, a King Kong wannabe. Most of his persona, his character, the look of what many people think of Donkey Kong to this day was developed during that Donkey Kong Country era in the 90s. In fairness, there was also like a whole continuity thing. Who is Donkey Kong versus Donkey Kong Jr. versus Cranky Kong? And while the developers did comment on him being a grandson or a son or whatever, I think in Nintendo's mind, it was very clear that they don't care about that side of continuity. As far as they were concerned, he was a gorilla named Donkey Kong and they would reuse him as they see fit. It's a very regular thing for Nintendo, and much more hyper-focused on from the fans than the actual people that make the games. But throughout the post-Rare Donkey Kong era, you can see different times where in certain visualizations, in certain artistic renderings, and even in the general uses of Donkey Kong, while they wanted to keep the familiarity of Donkey Kong with what he was made to be in Rare, they also seemed to want to bring him back into their initial design of what he was meant to look like, what he was originally drawn as, and what he was originally known as. He was not a main character as far as Nintendo was concerned. He was a side character consistent with the Mario universe, and one that is more popular and worthy of his own title because in essence, he was part of the first original Donkey Kong arcade game that starred Mario as Jumpman. But I don't know if it was a pride thing. I don't know if Nintendo just wanted Rare to move out of the picture completely. It seemed like they always wanted Donkey Kong to go back to what they viewed him as. But they also didn't want to completely let go of the legacy that was built up to him by the 90s. And they kind of just spent a lot of time with him in limbo between two different characteristics. When Retro Studios came into the picture, they pushed it a lot more. They built this game off of what we loved and knew from Donkey Kong Country. That's why it was called Country Returns. So naturally, those games felt a lot more familiar. The look of Donkey Kong and the crew around him felt a lot more familiar. But now Nintendo has their hands on Donkey Kong, and they want to make Donkey Kong as familiar as they can to what the masses will know him as because of their movie, because of their theme parks. Which for me felt very clear, but I think for a lot of other people, it was just starting to sink in. The Donkey Kong that I knew, the Rare Donkey Kong, more or less died in the 90s and had a brief reappearance in the early 2010s. The Donkey Kong that I saw in the spin-off titles was not the same. I always felt like he was the Nintendo Donkey Kong, not the Rare Donkey Kong. Not even the Retro Studios Donkey Kong, which was based off of the Rare Donkey Kong. Which is why when I saw his new model in the movie, and his new model in Mario Kart even, I wasn't really bothered by it, because I think I had already gotten over it a long time ago. I think to me, that Donkey Kong was long gone. I already had my closure. I already accepted it is what it is. There was no reason for me to believe that Donkey Kong would return. Again, there was rumors, right? A lot of people would suggest that we were going to get a DK64 type sequel, a 3D Donkey Kong. I didn't believe it. They've been saying a lot of crazy things for years. Where's that Star Fox and F-Zero crossover? But then, during the reveal of the Nintendo Switch 2, as I sat there anxiously waiting to see the sequel to Mario that I haven't seen since 2017, the 3D Mario that was supposed to be some kind of a combination of what we saw in Bowser's Fury and mixed with Odyssey and just that next advancement forward, that 3D Mario that I was so confident was going to be the launch title for the Nintendo Switch 2, because what else could it be? They weren't going to make another Zelda, and you need something big. You need something powerful. You need something like this. Oh man, dude, I lost it once again. Donkey Kong 3D was back, and it got love and it got attention, and he had an expressive face. Yeah, he looked like the Nintendo Donkey Kong, but whatever, I've made acceptance. It's okay. Why is he wearing overalls? Why is he wearing overalls? I don't know, but either way, I freaking lost my mind. That's it. This is Donkey Kong 3D Bonanza. Let's go. I love it. I don't know if this is going to be a good game or not. There is plenty of reason to suggest it is, because there's rumors that it is made by the Odyssey team. Nintendo took this one under their wing themselves. That means it's getting that first division love and care. And however I or anybody else may feel about the Nintendo Switch 2, I have no doubt in my mind that Donkey Kong Bonanza is going to be a phenomenal game. Or at the very least, I really hope it is, because Donkey Kong fans have been waiting a long time for this one. And while he visually may look different, I think Nintendo would be foolish to entirely pull away from what makes Donkey Kong Donkey Kong. And if you saw his character in the movie, if you saw his character in the books, and if you see the way that Nintendo has handled him outside of the visuals over the past 2 decades, in my opinion, there is still reason to believe this is going to be a Donkey Kong style game. The only thing is, keep in mind, we're like over 20 years removed from the last 3D Donkey Kong title. We're over 20 years removed from any 3D Rareware title that was similar to Donkey Kong. So naturally, this is going to look and feel very different to what we're used to. But I will say that this feels like it could be a good transition to 3D from the Retro Studios games, which felt like they had the heart and the soul of the Rareware games. If there is one game that potentially would have sold me on the Nintendo Switch 2, it is Donkey Kong Bonanza. And look, for the masses, this actually might not be a system seller. It might not even be remotely as good as a Zelda title or a Mario title. It might not be what the people were asking for. It might not be what the average person was even thinking would exist. But as somebody whose childhood was defined by this big gorilla, my 3 pillars of gaming when I was a child were a blue hedgehog, a red plumber, and this big oaf in front of me. For me, for my simple brain, the same way so many people wanted a new Metroid game when we got Tropical Freeze, and the same way that I view Tropical Freeze as a system seller, best game on the console. Well, not literally, but one of the best. I feel the same way about Bonanza. I am more hyped for that game than I am for Metroid Prime 4. And I know that I am going to eventually play it. It may not be on launch, but I will. I'll get around to it. But at the end of the day, while Donkey Kong may have had a very rocky 2000s and a mixed 2010s, the early 2020s have looked up, the foundations of his rebuild have been set, and the hope now is with 2025 and onwards, the Big Kong sees his revitalization in the gaming world and hopefully just starts getting that biased 10 out of 10 score for years to come. For the first time in a very long time, I am actually optimistic for Donkey Kong. So that would be kind of hilarious if Bonanza ends up stinking, but we'll see how that goes when that game comes out. Either way, I thank you all for joining along on the discussion, and I will catch you on the next one.